What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha America, welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, February 27th, 2018. Getting into the week here, we have a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to put your call on the air with your comments and questions when you call on in. And everybody is still pounding on this Parkland shooting. Everybody's trying to exploit it for their own ends. Some are blaming white males for it. And of course, the NRA. And everybody's just basically making political hay on all of this. So we're going to be launching into Parkland for the first part of the show, which means I'm probably going to get banned on YouTube again. But I want to start the program here with this quote from Thomas Jefferson. The strongest reason for the people to retain the right to keep and bear arms is as a last resort to protect themselves against tyranny in government. That's Thomas Jefferson. And there is no question we're entering into a phase of extreme government tyranny over our lives. You will have your vaccines. You will eat the GMO. You will do this. You will not do that. Sig heil, sig heil, sig heil. So, DC, DC, Uber, alles. Now, as you know, one of the teachers at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, Stacy Lippel, was grazed by a bullet when she was trying to get her students back into the classroom and get them under lock and key. And when she was interviewed on Good Morning America last Wednesday, she described the shooter as wearing full SWAT-style tactical garb. In fact, at first, she thought this was a police officer, except the officer was just shooting in every direction here. And he had body armor and a rifle that Stacy said she couldn't recognize. It's an unusual gun. And so more and more people are starting to say, what's going on here? Because you have all the eyewitnesses to Nicholas Cruz who are saying he was just dressed like a normal student, that he wasn't wearing any of this kind of gear. And so obviously there is another shooter out there, or that was the shooter for which Nicholas Cruz has been set up to take the fall for. So this story is falling apart faster than the Mandalay Bay shooting as well. Now, the emergency medical technicians, the first responders, are now starting to go more public and say they're very angry because they're saying the normal procedure in a mass casualty event, you don't wait for the police to clear the scene. You go on in, you get the patients, and they're very angry, saying they could have saved lives. A lot of the fatalities were students who simply bled out because nobody was there to stop the bleeding. And it almost seems like somebody wanted to maximize the number of casualties to maximize the emotional impact and political usability of this obviously staged shooting. But the EMTs are out there saying they were literally forbidden by the Broward cowards, the sheriffs, from going on in and potentially saving the victims here. Now, the Florida Speaker, Richard Corcoran, is out there taking issue, saying there are numerous reports of a standout order to deputies during the school shooting. Well, now Broward County Sheriff's Office has changed their story. And it's no longer a case of these 4 deputies simply cowering behind. Broward County is admitting the deputies were ordered not to enter the Florida school, and they're saying the reason was because they'd forgotten their body cameras, and they're not allowed to go into an action like this without their body cameras on and recording. And that's why they were not allowed to go on in. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons to sell you. Now, interestingly enough, we're now getting a report that the police also lost radio communication during this shooting. Now, this is a modern, well-equipped police department. There shouldn't be a radio blackout at the school in the middle of the community. Don't forget, during the Fort Lauderdale airport shooting last year, there was a radio blackout as well. So somebody appears to have been jamming police communications, just jamming the channels. This was a professional hit. This wasn't some deranged kid. I mean, I'll grant you Nicholas Cruz is deranged. He's on these medications and everything, but he was set up and used as a patsy. Now, over at MSNBC, as you know, Trump's idea of arming the school staff is not going over very well with the gun grabbers. They want us to completely disarm and rely on, well, the Broward County Sheriff's Office to protect us when the next mass shooting happens, which, for obvious reasons, we should not be doing. Remember, when seconds count, the police are minutes away. So over at MSNBC, Stephanie Rule was out there explaining why it's a bad idea to arm teachers. And she was comparing the differences between an AR-15 and the sort of handgun a teacher would wear, showing that the AR-15 fires bullets much, much faster and has a longer range than a handgun. Well, in a classroom or in a corridor, that's irrelevant. With a handgun, that other shooter is still within your range, but they're still out there trying to sell this idea. Oh, it's a bad idea. We have to go for total disarmament. We can't arm the teachers. That'll make the problem worse. Actually, no. Arming the teachers and staff is going to convince the shooter to maybe leave his AR-15 at home and go do something else for the day. Go to a baseball game. Go to a basketball game. Do something like that. That's the reason to have an armed populace, to give the people who have bad intent a reason to go someplace else. Now, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And again, the gun grabbers are still out there pushing this idea that we can trust the police to take care of us when some bad things happen. No, you can't. The police are rarely, if ever, present while a crime is actually being committed. They're happy to show up after it's all over, clean up the mess, put up that little yellow tape all over the place, have their pictures taken by the newspapers standing over the dead bodies and acting like they're relevant to what's going on here. But the performance of both the police and especially the Broward Cowards' actions in Parkland tell us why we cannot and should not allow ourselves to be disarmed and made to be dependent on the police. I mean, remember what happened down at that church. The church security guard stopped a mass shooting event. The police showed up and shot the security guard. There's a whoopsie for you. So, and I want to say, the majority of police are probably okay. The ones on prescription antidepressants, you got to watch out for. But the fact is, they're not going to be there. People with bad intent aren't going to commit the crime while they see a police car or uniforms right in front of them. They wait until the police go away. And that is why citizens have a right to defend their own homes with whatever weapons they choose to use. Every year in this country, over 1.5 million crimes are thwarted in progress by law-abiding citizens with legally owned firearms. The police can't match that record. They don't thwart crimes. They show up afterwards promising justice or retribution, which is another word for if we find the guy, we'll exact some kind of a revenge. You know, and let's be practical. The police didn't prevent my car from being stolen, and they're not even looking for the car thieves. They're just saying it's a huge problem. We don't know what to do. Now, Andrew Pollock, whose daughter was killed during the Parkland shooting, was on Fox News. And basically, he blasted the media for just this constant focus on gun control rather than the issue of school safety. And he's absolutely right. It's very obvious what the liberals are doing with this, as they've done with all these other false flags. Columbine, Sandy Hook, all of them. Every 2 years, we can expect another one of these. Boom, 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 boom. Obvious false flag. Oh, you got to give us your guns. No, we do not. We have a Second Amendment in this country that allows us to have arms equal, if not superior, to those in the hands of the criminals. Now, Michelle Malkin came out on her show and tore into Broward County Superintendent Robert Runcie, who was on TV saying they had absolutely no advance warning that Nicholas Cruz was any kind of a danger to the school. And of course they did. The warnings were all over the place. Everybody's lying to cover their gluteus maximus on this one here. Article out of the Daily Bell. The FBI and the sheriff either failed miserably before the Parkland shooting or much worse. It's another one of these articles saying this looks like this was set up to happen. They tagged this kid, Nicholas Cruz, from his Facebook post and said, here's somebody we can turn into the image of a mass killer. And we'll set him up, get him on there, and we'll have our gun-grabbing agenda going forward. Now, shock jock Howard Stern is out there eviscerating the gun control argument. He's using the analogy of sheep and wolves. And he says every night the wolves pick off a couple of us, and it's time for the sheep to get a gun and shoot the wolves and save their families. Now, as you know, Trump has signed an executive order regarding the bump stocks. And this is a very controversial issue. Now, the bump stocks were originally invented to allow people who had had their hands damaged, military veterans and so forth, to be able to shoot these guns. But depending upon how you hold it, it can turn your weapon into a rapid-fire weapon, which, again, if it's an AR-15, especially with the phenolic stocks, it'll wear out really quickly. And it's a waste of ammunition. And maybe I'm exposing my bias as a black powder junkie. You shoot one at a time. You learn to make that shot count. So anyway, everybody's now talking about the bump stocks, and it's certainly not something I would ever care to own. I don't even have a gun that would take a bump stock. That's just where we are. But the purpose of the Second Amendment is that the people be armed equally to the government, such that the government is deterred from abusing the people. It's like that quote from Thomas Jefferson I opened the show with. That our present government is abusive is beyond argument. We are overtaxed, and the money is not spent on our domestic needs, but is poured all over Israel and the war machine. Refugees and illegal immigrants are treated better by our government than our homeless veterans. Therefore, I am forced to conclude that bump stocks or any other device that allows the law-abiding citizen to match the force of the government's enforcers is sadly and tragically necessary. And it's an ugly reality we have to live with, but it is reality. Now, a lot of people have been talking about David Hogg. Apparently, he asked to be on Alex Jones' show, and Alex agreed, and then David canceled. And a lot of information is coming out about him. Apparently, he wasn't really a student at Parkland, in Parkland. Apparently, he actually graduated Redondo Union High School like a year ago, according to the latest reports we're getting on that. So he's a crisis actor here. And he even said in his yearbook photo he wants to work for CNN, where his mother's a VIP. His father is former FBI, but here's where it gets interesting. His father currently works for a company called CSS that produces shooter training systems that use the same laser-aimed rifle described by the teacher who saw the guy in full metal gear. That's what he does now, shooting simulations. So they're not really an anti-gun family. Dad makes a lot of money off of guns and training people how to use guns. Now, just a reminder that AR-15s are, in fact, useful to ordinary citizens. Apparently, WGN9 is reporting that there was an issue in Harbor Drive up in Illinois where some neighbors got into an argument and one of them attacked the other with a knife. And Dave Thomas witnessed the attack on his neighbor, grabbed his AR-15 out of his home and ordered the attacker to stop, and held him there until the police arrived. Because obviously the police weren't there to stop the knife attack. Had it been carried through to its conclusion, they would have shown on up, taped yellow tape all over the place, and stood there to have their pictures taken with the body and say, yes, this was a terrible tragedy, and we should have a 15-day waiting period on knives. Now, another one of the arguments you keep hearing from the gun grabbers is that America leads the world in mass murders. Oh, horror of horrors. As it turns out, this is completely untrue. which has never stopped a liberal from espousing a particular issue. But a study of global mass shooting incidents from 2009 to 2015 by John Lott's Crime Prevention Research Center finds that the United States does not lead the world in mass shootings. When measured by death per million population, the U.S. isn't even in the top 10. Norway is tops, with a mass shooting death rate of 1.888 per million. High, no doubt, because of the rifle assault by political extremist Anders Breivik. Number 2 is Serbia, followed by France, Macedonia, and Albania, Slovakia, Finland, Belgium, and the Czech Republic. The United States comes in at number 11. So that's another liberal gun grabber lie. We do not have the most mass shootings of any country on earth. So, moving on down here. The problem is there's no such thing as an assault rifle. It's a catch-all phrase that's used to describe a scary-looking gun. It has no legal or technical definition. The AR-15 in its basic form is no different from a semi-automatic hunting rifle. And in point of fact, the hunting rifle is actually far more lethal, because hunting rifles are designed to knock down and kill, and military-style weapons are designed to wound. And yes, they will kill, but the thinking behind the wounding is that if you merely wound your enemy soldier, you take a total of 3 enemies out of action, because it's going to take 2 of them to take care of the one who got shot. And that's why modern military arms are intended to do more wounding than killing, even though they still kill. Now, the AR-15, it looks military because it's based on the M16, but it is not an M16. It's a semi-automatic weapon, and it is useful for target shooting, home defense. I wouldn't recommend it for hunting because that would be unnecessarily cruel to the animals. But in the minds of a liberal, AR equals machine gun, because they're uninformed and they don't understand that the AR is not a machine gun. Machine guns, fully automatic weapons, are not exactly banned, but they're made very, very, very difficult to get a hold of. You have to have the license, you have to pay a huge, huge tax. I'm not even sure why anybody would want a machine gun, but they are actually still legal to own in this country. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, and you have to wrap your minds around this. Back in 2008, the United States Supreme Court ruled the Second Amendment applies to individual U.S. citizens and may include military weapons. And the Supreme Court ruled that the guarantee of the right to bear arms pertains to individuals and not, as some insist, to some government-operated militia. All the other rights in the Bill of Rights are considered individual rights. Now, the Second Amendment's prefatory clause, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, does mean citizens have a right to bear military weapons, because today's military has sophisticated weapons the government didn't have in the 18th century. To ban individual right to own such weapons would effectively render meaningless that prefatory clause, the well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. And again, the U.S. Supreme Court in the United States versus Miller reaffirmed we citizens have a right to the same military-style weapons carried by government soldiers. That is the law. And the liberals are out there desperate to try and disarm us so we can be more easily controlled. And I don't feel like being controlled. I don't. Certainly not by people who think that boys and girls are exactly the same thing or somewhere in between, or all the other nonsense they've come out with here. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We're going to come on back with some domestic political news, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I got an email from somebody saying that the 223 was actually designed to kill, and it's been very, very controversial. Not everybody agrees with that. The reason for the small caliber or the NATO standard. By international agreement, these guns are supposed to wound. And again, the thinking is in terms of numbers of people in the conflict zone. Because if you shoot somebody and you just wound them, then it takes 2 more people to take care of them. Now, the 223 is controversial because even though it's a narrow caliber, it's very long, and it has a tendency to tumble once it enters the target and cause a great deal more damage. Okay, now let's see. Somebody sent me another report, as long as we're on the topic of the Broward Cowards body cameras. Apparently, the police who responded to Seth Rich's murder had misplaced their body cameras. Or actually, they were removed and sent to evidence holding, and they disappeared from the evidence locker. Golly gee whiz, what a thing here. Okay, let's get to the domestic corruption, because there's a lot of it here. It's being described as a triple pounder nothing burger, and this is the Democrats' FBI surveillance memo. And it really is a lot of thunder and no lightning. Absolutely no evidence whatsoever for any of the claims made in it, except that it does in fact admit that the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation took this dodgy dossier funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign and took it to the FISA court to get their warrants to spy on Trump's associates. Now, that is a major scandal right there, and something should be done with it. But I can understand why the Democrats' memo is so weak. They don't have anything to work with. Mueller's special counsel office is flinging indictments all over the place for things completely unrelated to his original mission, which was to document that there was collusion between Donald Trump and the Russians in the 2016 elections. They have been looking for over a year. They've spent more than $10 million. They've found nothing. And Mueller's trying to justify his funding by just going after the small fry, flinging dossiers all over the place here. Now, Devin Nunes is signaling there is going to be a whole bunch of subpoenas for current and former State Department officials regarding this dodgy dossier that the House Intelligence Committee says was improperly used to obtain that FISA court surveillance warrant to spy on the president's campaign. And these former and current officials will be hauled into Congress next week to answer publicly questions about the salacious and unverified anti-Trump dossier written by the former British spy Christopher Steele as opposition research for the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. And of course, we'll cover that all here because you can bet there won't be a word of it on the corporate media. Now, Tom Fitton is out there. Apparently, he's filed a new lawsuit. Judicial Watch has filed a new lawsuit against the State Department trying to uncover the truth about why UN Ambassador Samantha Power requested more than 250 unmaskings of Trump officials from the surveillance data. Now, the normal way things are going is that unless you're thought to be an actual criminal, surveillance data obtained under a FISA warrant masks the names of the Americans being talked to, being communicated with. And for some reason, our ambassador to the United Nations requested unmaskings of 250 Trump officials. And Tom Fitton wants to know why. And Samantha Powers is not saying, and so now he's filed the lawsuit. All right, we're going to take we're coming up on a commercial break, so I'm going to hold off on this phone call until after the commercial break. Now, as you know, in the dodgy dossier, one of the claims that was made was that this Russian entrepreneur, Alexei Gubarev, was using his computers to steal the U.S. presidential election. And as you know, BuzzFeed got this dossier. They very recklessly published it without doing the basic fact check on it, which is why they're now being sued by Gubarev. And BuzzFeed, in turn, is now suing other people saying, you messed us up here. But Gubarev is pointing on out that the list of IPs that were given in that dossier, they're not of his servers. They're someplace else. We don't know where they are. I haven't seen the IP numbers. But in his lawsuit, he's basically saying he has been defamed. and he has suffered business losses because of these accusations that he was involved. And in any event, we know that the hack into the DNC servers wasn't really a hack. Experts have looked at the metadata on the files and said it was copied way too fast to be done over the internet. It had to be copied to a flash drive inside the offices. And obviously, most people, including yours truly, think it was Seth Rich. Seth Rich was the leak from the DNC to WikiLeaks for which he was killed, because the WikiLeaks leaks stopped the day that he died. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back with a phone call after these few words. And aloha, America, and welcome back to the show. Before we get to the phone lines, though, a story just came across my desk here. This is from Fox News, no less. Apparently in Milwaukee, there was an attempted carjacking, and the suspect, the attempted carjacker, was probably very surprised to find out the driver of the car he was trying to jack carried a concealed weapon. And the carjacker was shot dead. And again, the police weren't there. In fact, we just put up a story about 3 New York police officers were trying to evacuate a woman from a burning building. And when one of the officers was overcome by smoke, they simply dropped her. Dropped her in the hallway and left the building, and she died of smoke inhalation. You have to be prepared. You have to be allowed to have the right to take care of yourself, because the police aren't going to do it. Let's take some phone calls here. Jim in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Maybe you could help me out with this. When Nicholas Cruz's mother passed away back in November, he had a guardian. Why didn't Nicholas stay with her? That's something I don't understand. And the couple that took him in, I read in the Guardian about 2 weeks ago, the father used to work for military intelligence. So do we really know who this couple is, and why did they take him in?
Well, I don't really know that part of the story all that well. Supposedly they were friends of the family, and then apparently Nicholas got into a disagreement with them, which is why he moved into this mobile home with his friend. But again, this could all be a carefully crafted story to say, yes, he was a loner and he had mental issues, which we all know he did. He was on these prescription psychiatric drugs. But I think he was being groomed. It's not like the FBI just all of a sudden picks somebody at random and says, you're going to be a patsy. When we look at all of these discredited terrorist arrest cases, they spend months, maybe even years, grooming somebody to turn them into something that they can use.
Right. Well, that's why I became very suspicious when I heard that the father used to work for military intelligence.
Yes.
Yeah. Moving on to the Russian probe, and this is a question which I cannot understand. I don't know who's right and who's wrong, but why are people taking the field and pleading guilty if they didn't do anything?
Well, in the case of General Flynn, and by the way, he's retracting his guilty plea, they may have been set up and entrapped, and they figure that it's just going to be cheaper to plead guilty and pay the fine than deal with the massive legal bills of trying to fight the case out in court.
Well, that does make sense. Okay, well, thank you very much. You have a nice evening.
All right, same to you. Thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Mark in Florida. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How are you today, Mike? I enjoy your show. I listen to it every day.
Thank you very much.
Okay, devil's advocate here. Full disclosure, I'm an attorney, a defense attorney for over 25 years. We talk about this Nicholas Cruz, and that police or the FBI should have done something. And so this is what I pose to people who bring that up. Do what? Are they supposed to go out and say, gee, he looks dangerous, let's arrest him?
Well, under the Baker law, under the Baker law, they could have grabbed him and held him for an evaluation. But I think there's no question that he should have been watched a lot more closely. But in the end, he had been banned from that campus. And this is another failure on the part of the Broward cowards, in that he simply walked back onto the campus. In fact, he'd been banned being on the campus with a backpack previously, and then he was banned completely. So again, where was school security in terms of not letting this kid back onto the campus, especially carrying a rifle case?
And I have no argument with that. I agree with that. But everyone keeps talking about how they went out there 39 times. I used to do involuntary commitments. We used to call them Title 25s.
Okay.
As a prosecutor, they're kind of ugly, but they're hard to prove. Number one, you have to prove he's a danger to himself or the community. And we have people are saying, well, the cops should have done something. Okay, I don't want to give these cops any discretion, saying, gee, you look dangerous. I think I'm going to arrest you. I'm going to pull you in because you might commit a crime, so we'll do an involuntary for 72 hours. It's one of those things they say you should have done something after the fact. But really, what were they going to do? I'm not defending cops. I can't stand them. I have dealt with them for over 25 years.
Yes.
I don't get what they want them to do. What should we do? It's just a hypothetical for you.
Well,
I don't know the answer. I think I know the answer.
Again, in this case, there should have been an intervention. I mean, the Nicholas's behavior online, his behavior in real life, there were red warning flags. And maybe an involuntary commitment. Certainly, I would say that this was a clear case where he should have not been allowed to have guns. Apparently, the family he was living with did lock up the guns, but unfortunately, he either broke the lock or he had a key.
Well, listen, thank you for your time every day. Don't miss a show.
All right, thank you very much. All right. All right. Let's get on back at here. Boy, there's a lot of stuff coming in from the members. Getting on back to the news, very alarming thing happened earlier today. Well, the NSA director, Mike Rogers, was out there basically complaining, I guess is a good word for it, that he had not been granted the authority to disrupt Russian cyber attacks targeting our elections at the source. That's the key phrase, at the source. Now, first of all, we need to start out saying there is absolutely no evidence that Russian cyber attacks targeted the elections. We have massive evidence of primary rigging by Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the DNC and Hillary Clinton. We have massive evidence of election fraud on the part of the Democrats in the 2016 elections. There's no evidence Russia had anything to do with it, but that's still the narrative. But what Mike Rogers is talking about when he says disrupt Russian cyber attacks at the source is he wants the authority to launch a cyber war against Russia, which is going to be extraordinarily provocative and very dangerous. And obviously, again, in the absence of any real evidence of Russian cyber attacks affecting our election, who's he planning on attacking? Is he just going to go after the banks? Is he going to try and hack the military systems? They're still pushing the story that the only irregularities in our elections come from Russia. They don't want to talk about the primary rigging by the DNC. They don't want to talk about Israel and AIPAC. It's blame Russia for everything. Russia stole my car. Putin, if you're listening to this, you owe me a new Honda. But they're still pushing that narrative, and they're pushing toward war because they don't know what else to do. They're going to risk blowing up the entire planet Earth because they can't think of anything else to do to get out of this mess they've created. Now, there's a lawsuit that's been filed up in the state of Pennsylvania by the Public Interest Legal Foundation. And it basically addresses the fact that there are more than 100,000 non-citizens registered to vote in Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania is saying this is all because of a computer glitch linking driver's licenses to voter registration. And if you believe that one, I have some of Assad sarin gas to sell you. And apparently this Public Interest Legal Foundation has identified similar issues in Virginia and New Jersey. And they said Pennsylvania officials have admitted non-citizens have been registering and voting in the state for decades. Now, they're admitting to at least 12 million non-citizens in this country. The number's probably actually a lot higher because they've been using the 12 million figure for months now. 12 million strategically located can shift an entire election. That's what Hillary was counting on in 2016 to put her over the top. And illegal immigrants, non-citizens, are not allowed to vote, and we need to enforce that law. At the very least, we need to enforce that law before November. So President Trump, it's time to put on those presidential brass knuckles and start dealing with this issue of our flawed election and immigration systems, or you're going to be a one-term president. And the second half of your current term is going to be nothing, because if the Democrats steal the Congress this November, they'll be obstructionists. They will block everything that you try to do just so they can go into the 2020 campaign saying, Trump did nothing. He accomplished absolutely nothing. See? Okay, let's take another phone call. Mike in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I always like talking with you, Mike. I've been listening a lot of years with you, by the way, but that's another point. But I heard you talking about that kid who got a hold of a weapon, a firearm, in the house. And, I'm a firearm owner myself, and when I did buy my firearm, I bought a lock with it. All right?
Yes, yes.
I bought the lock. I don't have kids, all right? But I got, in fact, you know what, come to think of it, they gave me a lock for free.
Well, that was very good of them.
Cool.
That was very good of them.
They gave me a lock. Yeah, and therefore, if I have to babysit or my neighbor says, hey, would you watch my kids or something stupid, or say their kids, I don't know, let's just say their kids could break into my house or something. I mean, but I guess if I had kids, is my point, that I'd put the lock on it, and I would probably keep my ammunition somewhere else also. So you can't just blame this kid who's on psychotropic, reuptake inhibitors or whatever the hell is going on. You can't blame doctors. You can't blame society. It has to go down to the guardian of the child. And but I guess nobody really wants to talk about that because everybody's a victim. Possibly.
Well, first of all, you need to understand something. This Nicholas Cruz owned that weapon. He passed a background check, and he bought that weapon, and he owned it. But apparently he did some things with it, some selfies with it, where the people that he was living with decided that it really should be locked up. And they did, in fact, try and lock it up. But Nicholas owned that gun. And I'm in agreement that especially if young people are around, you should keep your guns locked up safely. You should keep the ammunition high up. Again, when I was growing up, every home had a gun cabinet. In fact, my grandfather was a cabinet maker, and he made a lot of gun cabinets for family members.
Yeah. Look, you got to have common sense, and I think people don't have that, because if a kid is thinking crazy, I'm not just saying playing video games but if there's, you got to be able to detect that, and that's why I say, parenting is one of the most greatest responsibilities a human can have, because parents are supposed to be the teachers of their children. They're not, you can't depend on schools or anybody, else besides influencing your child negatively, and that's what you should watch. Parents should watch out for too. But like I said, I'm not. I don't have kids. It's a great responsibility, but to have a child, you need to learn or teach the child how to see reality and to coexist in the world with, in a social sense with everybody else. And you're going to have ups and downs, but I don't know what to tell you. It's just terrible.
I'm in agreement with you.
Maybe it was.
I'm in agreement with you. There should be more parenting, and the parents should be teaching morality and everything. Unfortunately, going back to the feminist movement of the 1990s, women were literally shamed into leaving their duties as housewives and mothers and sent into the workforce, which increased taxing opportunities for the government. And then once the tax laws were changed, they were locked into that. So the majority of households now, both parents are working. And as a result, children are being raised by social media, peer pressure at school. And you're right, the schools are not teaching morality. There's always somebody ready to sue on the basis of some religion. They're exposed to this desensitizing violence on entertainment and video games. But in the end, I'm not even sure that this Nicholas Cruz actually pulled the trigger. This is just shaping up to have been another staged false flag shooting to push the gun grabber agenda. My thought is, what I went through when I was a kid worked perfectly. You get your first gun at age 12. You get the lesson about gun safety. It is rigidly enforced. And we just grew up with guns. They were just part of the environment. They weren't special. They weren't empowering. They were just another tool you used on the farm, like the tractor or the harvester or the combine. It was there for you to just get the critters out of your garden, get them to stop eating your crops.
Right. Yeah, the morality part, really is supposed to. Kids look up to their parents for that. They may disagree with their parents early on with their attitude about morality, but later on they actually pick it up. They actually accept it and they say, you know what, my parents were right. They were always right. Even though I rejected it. Early on.
Okay.
Let's not blame the guns, because next they're going to come after my steak knife, and I'm not going to be able to eat my dinner.
Yeah. Oh, that's definitely is going to be. After the guns, they'll outlaw swords. They want us completely disarmed so that we will do what we are told to do.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And the phone lines are.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. Thank you. Phone lines are now open. Rather interestingly, according to Stuart Varney, there is no penalty for illegals voting in California. Illegal immigrants are allowed to, well, they're not technically allowed to vote, but if they're caught voting, nothing happens to them. And so the illegals flood into this country, and they are promised that if you vote Democratic, we're going to take away stuff from the people who actually live here and give it to you, as long as you vote Democratic. And the illegal immigrants will go, see. Let's take another phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Doing okay.
I agree with the previous caller about the individual is the one that's responsible, but I have to disagree with him because it is society. It's the pharmaceutical companies. It's all the above, Mike. It's all the above. People don't understand. Cavemen were killing each other. It's human nature, but something's gone wrong. Can you hold me over?
Yeah, I'm going to hold you over. Stay on the line. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Dustin in New Jersey. And Dustin, take it away.
Yeah, like I was saying, Mike, it's all the above. It's the culture. Bad parenting comes from the culture, basically, in the long run. This society is not the same as it used to be because the culture is changing. It's getting worse. I used to work at a video game store, and little 6-year-old kids used to come in for Grand Theft Auto, and I would turn them away, and the parents would come in and get them the game. And even after you explain to the parents, they still would buy the game. So that tells you, what the problem is. It's just human nature is getting worse, Mike. I mean, I don't know how movies, video games, and I'm a gamer, but everything has to do with it. Not a gun is an inanimate object. A gun doesn't do anything. It sits there in a gun cabinet. If you have a violent movie showing prostitutes getting shot in the head and video games, Grand Theft Auto or this or that, yeah, it's a game, but that's more of I think that's worse than like a gun sitting in a gun rack. I mean, it
is desensitizing people to this kind of behavior. And, of course, the thinking in Hollywood is it's a vicarious thrill. The audience isn't really shooting people. They're not really stealing cars. But the audience comes out of these movies and TV shows sort of used to the idea that this could be an acceptable way to behave. That was certainly something that we didn't have this saturation of violence again when I was growing up. Of course, we only had like 2 TV channels we could receive in the town I grew up in. And but yeah, it has become a very violent pop culture, and that is going to have a desensitizing effect on people, especially if the other side of the equation isn't being shown. which is the suffering and the pain caused by shootings and crime and so forth. I mean, Grand Theft Auto makes stealing cars look like fun. Being on the other end of that equation, I can tell you it's been very traumatic, and it puts us through a great deal of difficulty having to get a newer car right now. And maybe if people were being exposed to more of that, they would understand that this other behavior really isn't all that acceptable. But again, this is getting away from the idea that this whole shooting in Parkland was another staged event to push that gun grabber agenda.
Oh, yeah. And, Mike, and remember that movie Falling Down with Michael Douglas?
Oh, yeah. I loved it.
Yes. But you can be a great law-abiding citizen, Mr. Clean, this or that, and then one day you just pop off. So
well, I don't think
checks,
popping
you know,
off.
You know what I mean? Like
I don't think popping off was a good description. Michael Douglas just did a fabulous job in that film. In fact, I think it was just on cable recently. But it was basically about a guy who's trying to be law-abiding. He's trying to play by the rules, and the society around him just keeps crushing him down and crushing him down and crushing him down. And we all have a breaking point. Let's be honest. We all have a breaking point at which we're just ready to go postal. And that's what this movie is really documenting, that even the best of us can reach a point where we just snap, and all of a sudden we're shocked to discover we're now the bad guy.
Especially when the hamburger's 10 times smaller than what you get, you know?
Well, that's not enough to put me over the edge here, but again, there is so much pressure.
That was in the movie.
Yeah, there was so much pressure on the American people right now. High prices, high taxes, shortages everywhere, poorly made products wearing out very, very quickly, and people just really... they're all on edge. They can see this world war coming. And there is probably a danger element there. And that may, in fact, be the reason for this last-ditch, sudden, hard sell that we have to disarm the American people. Dustin, I'm going to let you go. We got to take a break for station identification. We have another call waiting on the other side of these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're going to go to the phones now with Steve Elkins. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, just to add what Dustin was talking about, he's right on point. I've always had this theory that they're actually creating the next generation of soldiers with these young children. And I walked over to our Walmart in the sporting goods sections and noticed they have an M16 BB gun. Looks very, very realistic, like a real military M16, shoots BBs. And I've noticed all these kids walking around in camouflage fatigues and dog tag. They're trying every which way to look militarized. And then you think about these video games here, and they got the Soldier of Fortune magazine, and you've got all these videos. I can't remember the name of the there's a whole series of these killer video games where you're the soldier and you kill the bad guy. And you know, this military we have now, there's a huge weaponry surrounding drones and killing with drones nowadays. So, you know, we're killing people with toggle switches now. You know, somebody's sitting in a room watching their little drone and they're sending off a missile and killing people. And they're very desensitized, these kids. And so we wonder why. Why are we seeing all this? Whether this kid did it or not, I don't think he did. I think he's a perfect patsy. But we are they've been creating the next generation of soldiers with all this military garb in their heads and all these movies and videos. They're building the perfect soldier for the future. They're desensitizing them.
I would agree with you on that, but there's a downside to that, and that is that the kids are overweight, they're very weak. The Army recruiters have discovered they actually can't find recruits able to throw a hand grenade the required distance because they're not outside playing baseball or football.
Toggle switch drone war. That's why they have the drones. These guys, these little fat kids who grow up, these fat adults sitting there in an office somewhere with a toggle switch, you know, with the drone, operating the drone. They don't have to have that physical capabilities anymore. They're going to be killing people with just the movement of a toggle switch now with the drones.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people sort of say that that's what the video games were intended to do, but what we're finding out is that at least some of these drone operators and drone pilots are in fact aware that there's a difference, that it isn't a game, that real people are dying, and it's actually caused a shortage of these drone pilots, which the military is trying to deal with.
That's it, Michael. Hey, thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Rob in Illinois. Aloha, Rob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Let me start with my topic, and then I want to parlay to what Scuba Steve said.
Okay.
One, you were talking about the immigration numbers. You know, the last few months they've been saying 11, 12 million. Actually, they've been saying about 11 million for the last 7 to 10 years. So you take that and you parlay this with the statistics at the border. They're only able to catch 1 out of 7 people crossing that border. So that means 6 are getting by. So actually the illegal migrants, the invaders into this country, are upwards of 60 to 70 million, if not more. That's where I go with that.
Yeah, that's a mess.
Okay, and then you got to mention, you know, just to top that little ice cream there, is that the Chinese migrants, illegal border crossers, are the most popular, in the most numbers, above Hispanics, above Mexicans, above any other country in the world. It's the Chinese that have more illegals in this country than any other race or nation in the world right now. And it has been for quite a while. Just people don't talk about that. Why? We don't know. It's part of the plan. So let me sweep that under. I'm going to go over to Scuba Steve's saying how he's saying that they want these people, they're making the new next generation of soldiers, whatnot. Well, we all know about the MK Ultra project. Well, MK Ultra is where it all started. It's much more advanced now. Okay, we're talking technology where literally they can rev people up through the signals in their cell phones and other things. That's where the 5G is all going to come in, and so on and so forth. So right now, there's over 30 million, in excess of 30 million people pre-primed under the advanced MK Ultra program in this country. So at any given time, they can set anybody off they want. And this is worldwide. This is just in the United States. This is Russia. I mean, again, just start naming countries, and they got these people pre-primed under this deal. It's very, very disturbing, for lack of better words here.
Sort of reminds me of the old Charles Bronson film Telephone, where they had...
well, you'll have to tell us about it, Mike, because I don't recall it.
Okay, basically the storyline is that Russia had a bunch of agents in this country who were so mind-controlled they didn't even realize they were Russian agents until they got a phone call and there was a line of poetry that was read to them that would activate them to go on out and commit an act of sabotage.
There you go. That's all I got for today, Mike. There's just so much there's so much stuff we're being bombarded with. They're throwing everything at us, including the kitchen sink. We are definite dire straits. And let me refer you to, everyone's got to recall, and Jerome Corsi has been saying this a lot, to refer back to that December 21st executive order where Donald Trump says in there, we are under a national emergency. Deflect people to that, and we are. That's where we're at. And Jerome Corsi emphasizes this everywhere he goes. I'll let you go. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I mean, the whole purpose of the declaration of a national emergency is that it activates extra powers for the president that the president would not have without a state of emergency. And we've been in a state of emergency going all the way back to Franklin Roosevelt. And every incoming president reactivates that declaration of a national emergency of one sort or another because they like having that extra power and authority. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. And Hillary Clinton is back in the news. And this time she's out there, she's still playing the blame game. She can't accept the fact that we, the American people, just did not want to vote for her. And she's been leading the charge saying Russia, 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 Russia. But now she's got a new villain. And she's zeroed in on Facebook. And her rationale is that the Facebook charged the Trump campaign less for advertising on the platform. And therefore, Facebook was obviously biased toward Donald Trump. Well, if you read Facebook's actual advertising policy, the more impressions and clicks and interactions and shares a post generates, the less Facebook relatively charges the advertiser to reach people. It's sort of a bulk discount. If only 3 people are reading your posts, Hillary, you pay the full price. If you've got tens of thousands of people reading your post, you get the bulk discount. That's how it works, and that's always been Facebook's policy. But in Hillary's distorted worldview, Facebook is now her enemy. And she's come on out now with a tweet saying we should all care about how social media platforms play a part in our democratic process, because unless it's addressed, it will happen again. The midterms are in 8 months. We owe it to our democracy to get this right and fast. Now, what she's really calling for, of course, is she wants the independent media to be shut down. Because in 2016, the corporate media was all on her side. They even admitted it on air. There was no more that they could do to support Hillary Clinton. It was the independent media that kept the word out there about all the Clinton scandals, that called attention to Hillary's obvious medical issues. And that's what she wants to go away. They're literally declaring war. The government, the corporate media, Hillary Clinton, they all want the independent media to be shut down somehow, any way that they can. First Amendment be gosh darned here. Now here's where it gets interesting. The State Department has just received $40 million to fund their own troll farm. There is now going to be an official U.S. propaganda office to go on the offensive against that gosh darn independent media. Here's the part that really irks me. Nowhere in the Constitution is the government allowed to spend your tax dollars to lie to you. In fact, nowhere in the Constitution is the government allowed to lie to you. And the 10th Amendment says they can't assume that. But here they're going. $40 million to basically set up their own troll farm, to just pour more garbage on the independent media, try and make us look kooky. Now, long ago, when the United States was still a civilized country, there was actually laws that said the U.S. government may not propagandize the U.S. citizens. That law was rescinded, or it was overwritten by a law that says, yeah, we can propagandize you. We have to convince you the wars are good, and that Russia is evil and China is evil, and we're the light of the world, blah, 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 blah. Now, Alex Jones got hit with a second strike on YouTube. And apparently this resulted from a CNN lobbying campaign. And last week, CNN published a front page story entitled "InfoWars is 2 strikes away from being banned from YouTube," in which CNN deliberately misrepresented InfoWars content in relation to the Parkland school shooting. And the good news is that YouTube has backed off that second strike, because there's been a huge public outrage over this very overt censorship campaign by YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and Google. I mean, Google's out there banning any searches with the word gun in there, including Nerf guns, paint guns. Just ridiculous here. Now, I can understand why CNN may be a little bit upset with Alex Jones. They're in serious trouble. Right now, their ratings are showing they have less audience than the Hallmark Channel. And probably a lot of you didn't even realize we had a Hallmark Channel. But nobody's watching CNN. CNN's viewership is basically anybody who's sitting in an airport waiting area, because CNN is already up there. CNN pays the airports to have those monitors up there. Or in your bank waiting line. It's like the omnipresent view screens in George Orwell's 1984. You're not allowed to be away from one. You watch it, and it watches you. But apparently, in terms of actual people in their homes watching CNN, it is just not there. Now, over at Newsweek, they appear to be in much deeper trouble than previously thought in this fraud probe by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. This is a report from the Wall Street Journal. And apparently, it's gotten so bad that dozens of their staffers have handed in their resignations. They're getting on out of there. Now, here's a very important article. This is from shtfplan.com, probably a lot of other places as well. And it's titled, "YouTube Censorship, They Are Stepping It Up. Something is in the works." And basically, it's calling attention to the fact that all of a sudden, all of these corporate-owned social media platforms are towing the U.S. government line, and they're deleting, if not outright banning, anybody who doesn't toe the line and parrot the corporate media and government's story on anything. And it does seem to be getting worse every single day that goes along. Now, maybe it's going to slow down because of that lawsuit against Twitter and the fact that we're all seeing that this is going on. And as we have on this coffee mug over in our online store, the fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force it to act like one where everybody can see it, which is exactly what is happening right now. But it does feel like we're building up towards something, and obviously my expectation is we're obviously building up to a major war, because our government can't think of any other way to get out of the mess they've created. The economy is in a mess. Our infrastructure is crumbled. We've got massive unemployment. They don't want to admit that they failed as a government. They don't want to admit they're corrupt. Look how hard they're protecting Hillary and the Clinton Foundation. They need a war as a distraction in the hope that we will all forget about the crimes and the corruption and the decay of our infrastructure. And we'll salute the flag and throw our children onto the designated enemy's bayonets. Now, a little bit of good news. You know about the Health Ranger. It's a website, a lot of good information there. They are now launching their own video streaming service. It's going to be an alternative to YouTube, and it promises to be uncensored. And I hope they will allow live streaming, because I'll move my live streaming setup over to there when it finally opens, because already YouTube has deleted some of the videos that I have on this channel. Now, there's a new bill before the House of Representatives, H.R. 1865, and it is the first step in removing protections of website owners for what users post. There was a big stink a couple of years ago about whether website owners could be held liable for content posted on their site by users, especially small websites like mine, where I obviously cannot monitor it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, in this context, this bill is targeting specifically U.S. sites on which information regarding human trafficking is being posted. And they're doing that because nobody can really argue with that. Human trafficking, especially of children, is a terrible, terrible thing. But it's the camel's nose under the tent to try and make site owners responsible for content, because then obviously shills can post all kinds of illegal or hateful content, and we can be sued out of existence. This is turning into a real war. That's why Republic Broadcasting needs your help. We're in the fight of our lives right now. So let's talk about the war zones. There are so many of them. Apparently, Lithuania is deploying some of their special operations forces to Afghanistan. And they're increasing their support of NATO's Operation Resolute Support. Where do they come up with these names here? As I mentioned the other day, the U.S. is bombing Afghanistan so much they're actually running short on the bombs. And they're flying a bunch of them out of here in U.S. Pacific Command to take over to Afghanistan. Now, down in Syria, things are getting interesting. Russia is trying to order a daily truce for evacuations from Syria's eastern Ghouta. Now, this may get very, very tricky, because we have seen reports that the jihadis, the U.S.-backed terrorists, are refusing to let the civilians live because they want more dead civilians to make it look like Assad is committing war crimes. And apparently any civilians who are trying to escape the area are being fired on by the jihadis. Now, U.S.-led coalition warplanes have once again struck Syrian regime forces. This is moving away from the proxies, because most of the U.S. proxies are basically losing, or they're gone. ISIS is evaporated completely. So now we're seeing direct conflict between the major players, U.S. and Russia. Russians are being killed, and now the U.S. is bombing Syrian forces. Now, the U.S. is calling it self-defense. The U.S. always calls it self-defense. But the Syrian state news agency SANA is saying this is an aggression. This is an aggression against Syrian regime forces who are still fighting ISIS, Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, and the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces. Story from out of Global Research up in Canada. The U.S. is protecting ISIS to weaken the rivals and expand the U.S. occupation of Syria. And it is simply saying this story that the U.S. is opposed to ISIS is nonsense, and nobody buys it any longer. The U.S. was arming, training, supplying ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, going all the way back to when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. They were taking weapons that had been captured in Libya because they would be untraceable, they thought, and they were smuggling them into Syria. And that consulate in Benghazi was the hub where it was all going through. The consulate was right next door to a warehouse where all this stuff was being stored. Another U.S. airstrike in Syria's al-Shafa region has killed at least 25 people, with more than half of the people identified as women and children. Now, details on the slain are still emerging, but a U.S. spokesman attempted to downplay reports. As always, we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about the wars. We're talking about Syria. And there's a very interesting article over in Zero Hedge basically saying Ghouta is an Aleppo repeat. And it is a desperate attempt to save the Assad must go agenda. And at this point, the U.S. clearly has changed the narrative again. They're moving away from, we're just there to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda, because Syria and Russia pretty much have cleaned the country out. There's a couple of hot spots left, Ghouta being the prime one. And now they're back to Assad must go. Isn't that up to the people of Syria to decide? That's the way these things are supposed to work. And it's rather amazing to hear the U.S. screaming about Russia interfering in our internal politics when the U.S. has been interfering in the internal politics of country after country after country after country, including some who are supposed to be our friends. The U.S. actually did a regime change in France, which is probably what led to France deciding they wanted to cash in their Federal Reserve notes for the equivalent value in gold, which led Nixon to end gold convertibility. So apparently the Turkish armed forces and the Free Syrian Army linked the Turkish armed forces held area in western Aleppo and southwestern Afrin after they captured the village of Ankwala and nearby points from the Kurdish YPG. So Turkey has gained control of a strip of the border inside Afrin. And again, whatever the reasons they're saying, this amounts to an invasion of Syrian sovereign territory by Turkey. And I don't think Syria is too happy about that. Now, here's a very interesting article. This is at Blacklisted News. Americans are horrified by mass killings unless the government is doing it. And it's basically pointing out how everybody is wringing their hands over the tragedy of the school shooting in Florida, and we should. Those kids didn't need to die. But at the same time, we just turn a blind eye to the millions being killed by the U.S. government around the world. And the fact that government is doing the killing isn't an excuse. We should be outraged over all of it, especially when you consider how many of these people being killed are not combatants. They're women, they're children. It's just indiscriminate death being poured all over these places. Now, the U.S. has just announced that they plan to stay in Syria and Iraq indefinitely because of the threat of terrorism. Well, the government of Iraq doesn't want the U.S. there anymore. The government of Syria has never wanted the U.S. there anymore. The U.S. is just out there saying, terror, 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 terror. We've got to move into your country. Got to bring in all kinds of bombs and weapons and stuff. They're trying to garrison the world like the ancient Roman Empire. And that cost of maintaining those legions and that far-flung empire is part of what brought Rome down in the end. There's a lot of death out there, and I'm not trying to trivialize what happened in Florida. But there's a lot more death out there caused by the United States government that we should be angry about. Now, the United States is warning Iraq against buying the Russian S-400 air defenses. The U.S. wants Iraq to buy U.S. weapons, which are much more expensive and don't seem to work as well. But rather than make better, cheaper weapons, Washington has told Baghdad that if they buy the Russian S-400 air defense system, the U.S. will hit Iraq with sanctions. It's arm twisting. It's like the mafia. You got to buy our product here or something bad going to happen. It's not a way for a civilized country to behave, not by any stretch of the imagination. Very alarming story coming out of Blacklisted News again. Britain is now officially preparing for war against Russia. Apparently, the UK's Minister of Defence, Conservative Gavin Williamson, announced that the United Kingdom is changing its fundamental defence strategy away from one that's targeting non-state terrorists to one that instead targets three specific countries: Russia, China, and North Korea. And of course, he acknowledged that a massive increase in military spending will be needed for this, and that savings will have to be found in other areas of government spending, like, say, the health services, to pay for it all. Russia and China and North Korea are not the threat. The United States is. Just go back over the last 18 years. Who has been invading all these other countries on the flimsiest of excuses? It's not Russia. It's not China. It's not North Korea. North Korea is trying to kiss and make up with South Korea. Only the U.S. is getting in the way of that. So we're going to take another commercial break here, and after we come on back, more news and potentially more phone calls as well. So stay tuned for these words from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And somebody just sent me this tweet. Apparently, there's a breaking news report out of Syria, a new massacre committed by the United States. The U.S. coalition carried out a series of airstrikes on a gathering for displaced families in Daret in Deir ez-Zor. At least 24 civilians have been killed. Okay. Now, as you know, Bibi Netanyahu in Israel is in serious trouble. And he's facing corruption charges, and everybody's already saying he's done. He's going to be forced to resign. It's the end of the Netanyahu era. And looking at this article in 972 Mag, it's basically saying that Abbas is going to benefit from this because the deal of the century being worked out by Trump and Netanyahu did not involve Abbas in the negotiations. He was simply being told, you will implement this. And now with Netanyahu on the wane, it's entirely Abbas is basically back in control. And we'll see who is going to replace Netanyahu, and if he's really a hardliner, or if he's got some common sense and says, this really needs to back off here. Now, the Knesset has just started on a bill that will ban any groups and any media presentations in schools that are critical of the IDF. In fact, they've also passed a law criminalizing criticism of the IDF. And so we're seeing the same kind of a crackdown on dissent in Israel that we're seeing here. Now, a little positive story. Apparently, there are some Palestinian students who are taking part in what is called the Silverstone Race Circuit. And it's basically students from all over the world building a race car and going on and getting into this race. And what makes this story special is these Palestinians literally built a car from recycled parts from wrecked cars. Total cost of construction, $5,000. And they're going to go compete in the international competition. And I think that is really good of them to do. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Francis in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha to you both.
Aloha.
I'm a little late tuning in, but when you mentioned about the various governments of who knows what country going and attacking another and so forth and trying to instigate a war depending on who the national banker is and what they're trying to attain and so forth, I had a rather silly thought for you, although it probably will never happen. If the government structure is so gung-ho and dead serious in the U.S., here in the U.S., about starting a war with who knows what, then go ahead and take that government structure, along with the military-industrial complex, along with the national bankers, and whatever other entity, if you want to call it that, and put them on an island by themselves, regardless of how big the island is, and say, all right, y'all want to have a war? Then knock yourselves out. And guess what? You're not going to get a boat to get off the island unless you either build it yourself or we notice that there's maybe one person left.
Well, I had a slightly different approach, and that is that we take all these people who think war is fun and we put them into a sports arena with chainsaws. We sell the TV rights, and whoever comes out with most of their body intact is declared the winner. But you're absolutely right. Part of the problem with modern war is the people who want the war take no risk. They're not out there. I mean, in the past, leaders who wanted war led their own troops into battle. Napoleon, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, they all went out there and they took that risk with their soldiers. Today, it's like that other caller said about the push-button war. Our leaders stay safe in their bunkers underneath Washington, D.C., and they send other people's children out to die.
Yeah, that to me is a despicable pig. Because, well, actually, I take that back. A pig has more dignity than that.
Yes.
For that matter. But yes, it's oh gosh, I could go off on a tangent on that garbage, but when it comes down to greed, bloodlust and all that, oh, I know what it was. What you described about putting everybody into an arena with a chainsaw and all that, the first thought that came to mind was a film of long ago called Starship Troopers.
Yes.
With all the blood war and everything else, and I thought, I mean, after the first time I saw that film, that was it. I couldn't view it another time. It was nasty.
Yes.
So, anyway. Y'all have a great one.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Ted in Honolulu. Aloha, brah. What's up?
Hey, Michael. Aloha. I'm over in Honolulu. It's 79 degrees over here today, and nice day. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. It's 79 degrees here in Aiea.
Oh, good on you. Good on you. Okay, well, a couple of comments. My first time calling in, but pertaining the gun laws, I'm very familiar with the gun laws in Hawaii, and actually found out most of the laws here are set by the Board of Health. So these are very local, and looking at all the literature, almost all the gun laws are local all over the U.S. So everybody seems to be barking up the wrong tree, attacking Washington. Go talk to your local officials if you're not happy with your local gun laws. So that's one statement.
Well, I understand that a lot of the attempts to ban assault weapons are being handled out at the state level. The only reason Washington, D.C. is being mentioned is because the Democrats are trying to use this to demonize Donald Trump for his past pro-gun stance.
Yes, sir, I understand that, of course, I understand. Well, the main thing is, though, the AR-15, of course, is being villainized, singled out, that you might be aware, on the Big Island, that's the weapon of choice for hunters. Many of the local people here, they love the AR-15, and they use them. They use them in their everyday life, and especially hunting wild pigs. But they do have some use for that. I personally am not attracted to those, but I would like to say, as far as the shooting, the school shooting in Florida, there's culpability with the bumbling, incompetent bureau, and they have a history of always messing up investigations. But they should be held criminally liable for not pulling the gun from that so-called child. I mean, he's 19 years old. You realize in Vietnam the average age of the soldiers was 19 and 20
Yes.
years old?
Yes.
And 50,000 died. They're not children, but in Honolulu, I can tell you, I know the laws because I bought several guns lately. But not only 14-day waiting period, but if you have any mental counseling, anything, you have to have letters from the doctor, letter from the hospital. You have the FBI background check.
Mm-hmm.
You have to then appear in person, pick up your application, to file the application, and come back in 14 days, pick up the license, go get the gun, bring the gun back, and register it with them. So they get 3 times to look at you, the HPD officers, and there's generally 3 of them. But I'm just saying, the lawyer that called in earlier, he was saying, what could they do? What do you want them to do to the kid? Well, take the gun away. In Hawaii, they can take your gun away. Even if you have a medical marijuana card now, They will take your gun away. So people just don't seem to have the facts. They don't understand. There are a plethora of laws regulating guns. There's gun control out there. We all know there's an agenda. So I just want to throw out, there is a great movie you might enjoy and the listeners might like to see, and it's called The Magnificent Seven.
Yes.
You might recall that from the early 60s. Yul Brynner, Steve McQueen,
It's a classic.
James Coburn, but it was taken, it's a classic. It's taken from Hayakawa's Seven Samurai, Japanese movie.
He sued.
It's all about the farmers.
He sued for theft of the story, and they had to put out a new release print where it said based on Seven Samurai by Ishikawa.
Yes, sir, it's there. It's on the film, but I happen to watch it. It's on Roku right now for free.
Mm-hmm.
I watched it twice, but if you want to see a good solution, it's all there in that movie. And also, it has the farmers giving all the debate that you hear, all from the Dems and the Fems and everybody. But they ultimately go to hiring these hired guns to protect themselves from the banditos, which was Eli Wallach. But
yes.
They did prevail by having strong firepower. And I'm of the belief that, you need to harden the schools, fortify the schools. Honolulu schools are not safe. They are wide open. I'm sure you're aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
I even talked to a public school teacher. Public school teacher here last week told me a kid brought a weapon to class, 15-year-old. And the school took it away, and his father got mad at the school that they took the weapon away from the kids. So things are not right in Hawaii, and I doubt that they're right in the U.S. So I'm an airline pilot. I went through 9/11. When 9/11 happened, TSA came to the airports. TSA came on board with federal air marshals, and they also fortified the cockpits, and they gave us the choice to have guns in the cockpit. And you know what? It has worked. It has worked. So far, so good. So there are remedies. If you want remedies, there's solutions. This is the question. It doesn't seem they really want a solution. They want agendas, which of course,
Yes. No, I mean, there are going to be more of these staged school shootings until the American people surrender their guns, which is not going to happen. And that's a very bleak outcome there. But that's definitely what's going on. The government has reached the point where they understand we, the American people, don't trust them, don't obey them, don't listen to them, don't really need them. And so the next step is gun confiscation. So the government's people can stand there with their guns and say, you will do this, you will take that vaccine, you will eat this food and not ask if there's GMO in it, you will so forth and so on.
I agree completely. And I just, one thing I feel if I was the president, I would take action right now to put in guards, military guards, call back the Marines, the National Guard, whatever, if you have to. Put them around the schools, defend our children. That's number one. Until we can fortify the schools, put fences in, like a TSA set up, one way in, one way out. You have to do that. But again, you have to stop the people having access, not the access to guns. It's the criminals' access to the schools and the children. People don't seem to understand that. I don't think that's so complicated. I would call back the troops from Afghanistan if I had to, and put them around to guard our schools. I'm sorry the president's not bold enough to take such a step, but I think that would be real leadership. That's what we need.
It would be if you go along with the story that this Nicholas Cruz acted alone in shooting up the school. I'm of opinion that it's just like Columbine and Sandy Hook and the Mandalay Bay, that this was engineered and created to push the gun grabber agenda, and Nicholas Cruz was set up to be the patsy. And why he's still alive is a mystery to me, because normally these things work a lot better when the patsy is dead. But somehow Nicholas got out of this one alive. And if you put guards and bars all around the schools, then gun grabbers will simply go someplace else, like they did in Las Vegas. Shoot up a concert, shoot up a shopping mall, shoot up a movie theater. I mean, there are simply too many targets out there to protect, from this kind of chicanery on the part of the gun grabbers. And apparently these gun grabbers are willing to sacrifice children's lives for their agenda. Their agenda is more important. They don't really believe in school safety. They need lots of bloody shirts.
Well, I watched Mr. Pollack on Chris Wallace' Sunday show, and the father of the slain girl, and I like his chutzpah, his style, and he's saying, well, let's don't get off on the tangents. Let's stick to school safety. And that's just what I would say. The priority now is school safety. Whatever you got to do, make the students feel safe. And they don't feel safe. I asked the teacher Thursday night, talking to her, said the kid brought a weapon to school. Do you feel safe? She said, no, she doesn't. And schools here they don't even have fences. They're wide open here.
Yeah,
so
I know.
Saying,
we actually.
So I'm just saying, Hawaii has got some of the best gun laws, and again, they are local. People don't really understand them. You have to look up state by state your laws for the guns. There's tons of gun control and common sense gun control, but this is an attack on the Second Amendment. Of course, then the First Amendment right behind it. But again, we need some real leadership. If the problem is school safety, let's address school safety, just like we address the airports and airline safety.
Well, you're absolutely right there. If we lose the Second Amendment, the other 9 amendments in the Bill of Rights don't mean anything anymore. The government won't have a reason to respect them. I mean, the government's already trying to put limits on the First Amendment. They're completely ignoring the Fourth Amendment with all this surveillance. Before I let you go, though, my recollection is that here on Oahu, boar hunting is only allowed with bow and arrow because of the density of the population. But I guess they're allowed to use rifles down on the Big Island.
Well, yes, that's what I was talking about on the Big Island.
Okay.
I have friends down there, and of course, hunting's a big part of them. But I don't think they can do that here. But they do use knives, dogs, and I think pistols. But Hawaii, they love the guns, but they're very safe here. The culture, and when not really shoot 'em up culture, but it shouldn't relax the guard, and certainly need to protect the children. And I just feel like we need to talk to our local officials. Just if you're not happy with your gun law, start there at home. And then, of course, the home starts with the parents. And obviously the parents need to take more control of the kids.
Well, that's a part of it. But again, we need to look at these very dangerous prescription psychiatric medications, because almost all of these shootings involve people who are either on or withdrawing from these medications. And Congress actually held hearings on it, but chose to do nothing because the pharmaceutical corporations are such great campaign donors every election season. We've allowed money to dominate common sense in our country, and that's why we have poor quality medications. We're going to be talking about vaccines later in the show. Everything is so expensive. Everything is falling apart. It's all about the money. And we've lost sight of other priorities. Anyway, Ted, thank you for the phone call. We got to let you go. Got to do a commercial. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Just jumping on back to the Parkland shooting. Apparently, somebody has leaked a series of emails out of Fox News in which the correspondents and the prostitutes are being ordered to defend Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel. And interestingly enough, over at CNN, they are so opposed to Donald Trump, they criticize him, where Trump come on out and said anybody would shoot up a school is a sicko. And I agree. And they've been made sicko with these prescription antidepressants. But apparently CNN came on out and said, oh, you can't do that. You can't call these people sickos. And they had experts come on in and say, really, you're insulting the mass killer. The corporate media has just become utterly useless. Alrighty, let's get on back to the news. A lot of stuff coming on in here. And there we are. Now, regarding immigration, as you know, Israel has this really bizarre idea that the rest of the world should have open borders and blend everybody together, but Israel has to be kept racially pure because they are the chosen people. And apparently Israel is getting ready to deport a whole bunch of asylum seekers back to Africa. And the asylum seekers are not happy about that, and so they've staged a major protest in Tel Aviv. Now, the other day we were talking about how the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was closed because Israel was passing this bill about church lands and more taxes. But Israel has now backed down because apparently the closure of the church just sparked a global outrage. So there we are. Another story from Electronic Intifada. Israel is now going to forcibly transfer several Palestinian communities entirely to make way for more illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank. And the Israeli army has issued orders to the communities of Ain al-Hilwa and Jamal in the northern Jordan Valley, demanding immediate and total eviction of all residents within 8 days. Israel issued the same order to the community of Jabal al-Baba in the so-called E1 area near the mega settlement of Mala Adumim on the 16th of November. In all of these cases, the expulsion orders targeted entire communities. All of this, of course, illegal under international law. Now, apparently, Israel is starting to send police officers to man the police stations in Gaza, according to the PLO. And PLO officials are saying that this is aimed at establishing control over Gaza's Hamas-run police stations. All right, we're going to take a break. Back in hour 3 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We've got some breaking stories here. As I mentioned earlier in the show, Russia has basically declared a daily ceasefire to allow civilians to leave Ghouta. And apparently, as I mentioned, was a possibility on the show, the U.S.-backed rebels are firing on the civilians so that they can't get to the corridor, the escape corridor. And apparently, Newsweek is in even bigger trouble than I reported earlier in the show. Apparently, they're way behind on their rent. They owe their landlord more than $300,000, and apparently the landlord is moving to evict. So Newsweek is going to go away. And Syrian army, as usual, discovers Israeli weapons in the Daesh hideouts. All right, just staying on top of this stuff. Now, back in Palestine, back in the West Bank, there's a double standard for law. The illegal settlers are under the control of Israeli civil law, while all the Palestinians are subject to Israeli military law. In other words, a person's nationality and ethnicity determines which set of laws applies to them. That's racism right there. And of course, we've seen how Israel's military courts behave toward Palestinians. Like that young girl who's still being held for slapping a soldier who shot her family member. Now, the British, over in the United Nations Security Council, the British put together a resolution that promised action against violations of a UN arms embargo on Yemen and pointed to a report that cited Iran as a violator. And Monday's vote was 11-2 with 2 abstentions on the draft, and Russia vetoed it. Russia then put forward their own resolution to extend sanctions, and the claim that Iran was involved was left out, and the motion was adopted unanimously. Well, this didn't go over very well with the United States, which promptly escalated their threats against Iran, and basically saying the Russians and Iranians are in cahoots. And you need to go back and remember what all of this stuff, this ruckus in Yemen is about. A few years ago, the U.S. had a successful regime change there, and they put in a puppet ruler. Well, the people of Yemen did not like their puppet ruler, and just like the Iranians in 1979, they gave the puppet the old heave-ho. So the U.S. went back in there using Saudi Arabia as a proxy to whoop those Yemenites into accepting their puppet ruler. And the Yemenites are not accepting, and the Saudis are not doing very well, and so the U.S. is coming in with more sanctions, and Saudi Arabia is coming in with a naval blockade. It's out and out pure conquest. That's what's going on. It is pure conquest for the sake of conquest. So the U.S. is out there trash-mouthing Russia and Iran again, a precursor to war with them. And there's a story that came out of Zero Hedge. Growing risk of U.S.-Iran hostilities based on false pretexts. Intel vets warn. Yeah, of course. Truth is the first casualty of war. Look how we got stuck in Iraq. Saddam has nuclear weapons. Well, no, he didn't, but hey, we're here anyway. There's no compelling reason for us to go to war with Iran. Iran does not have nuclear weapons. Iran has weapons that it uses to discourage invasion. Iran has not launched a war of conquest against another country in over 200 years. Certainly not since 1979. That's a record the U.S. and Israel can't come close to. Today it seems like these countries can't go 6 months without attacking somebody. Another flashpoint that's heating up is Pakistan and India. And apparently Pakistan is vowing to get revenge on India after an attack. And according to the Express in Great Britain, the attack from India along the contested border known as the Line of Control, basically the Line of Control splits the regions of Kashmir, with Pakistan owning one side and India the other. And the region of Kashmir has been contested by both countries for decades, causing high levels of tensions. Everybody getting ready to go to war. U.S. is preparing a high seas crackdown on North Korea sanctions evaders, which will include interception and inspection of ships. Now, the U.S. is saying that this is just short of a naval blockade on North Korea. North Korea is saying that it would consider a naval blockade an overt act of war requiring a response. But basically, the U.S. is committing acts of piracy. They're stopping other countries' ships in international waters and boarding them without permission. Maybe to be generous, we could say they're acting as privateers. But during the golden age of piracy, privateers were hanged right alongside the pirates. We're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, South Korea is pushing for North Korea and the U.S. to talk. And Trump is out there saying it's entirely possible, we're willing to talk, blah, blah, blah. Except that he follows it up by saying that there'll be talks only if there's a guarantee that North Korea would surrender their nuclear arms. Well, that's a non-starter right there. And this is a tactic we've seen from Israel over the decades. We'll talk, but first you give me what I want, and then we'll talk about maybe I'll do something nice for you. That's basically what Trump is saying. And again, North Korea is saying the reason for the nuclear arsenal is to deter an attack by the United States. They're being very, very specific because they've seen the recent history of the U.S. The U.S. goes into a country, talks them out of their weapons of deterrence, promises they won't invade, then they invade. They did it in Iraq. They did it in Libya. They did it in Syria. They're getting ready to do it in Iran. And they're trying to do it to North Korea. All right, let's take a phone call here. Jeff in Georgia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, I appreciate the opportunity of coming on. I'm the guy that always calls about the Jewish role in the Kennedy assassination. But the reason I called, Michael, is if you go back in history, the last 150 years, you had the British Empire, then you had the American Empire. But you basically had largely Anglo-Saxon rule. Today you have basically a Jewish oligarchy that uses the Anglo as a puppet. We have to overthrow not only the Jewish oligarchy, we have to overthrow the WASP. And I'm one of them. But I am at full 180 from the powers that are bringing us closer to war. England, United States, they're still WASP controlled, and they're allied as puppets to their Jewish masters. And the world is tired of that, and I am too. And I just want to ask you, I mean, you may not be able to speak out against white supremacy like I can. I don't know. But in addition to bringing down the Jewish cartel, do you agree that we need to bring down the WASP, the Clintons, the Gores, the Bushes,
well, see, I like the way you're going now. Now you're talking about individuals. I'm not very happy when a caller calls on in and starts painting with a very wide brush saying Jewish this or WASP that. I'm much more comfortable when we're talking about individuals who have done bad things, like the Clintons, like Netanyahu, and so forth and so on. So I'd like to constrain our discussion along those lines. But it's very obvious we are being pushed toward a global war. Part of the culprits are the bankers, who see the war as a way to basically plunge the world back into debt for another century. We're being pushed into war by the arms makers. We're being pushed into war by our government that can't think of anything else to do to get out of this mess they've made. And, of course, we're being pushed into war by the corporate media, which is expecting that this will get the viewers back. War coverage live from the front will get the viewers back from the independent media.
Well, I appreciate, for you pulling me back some. But, Michael, if I were talking about Muslims, I would basically be talking about the terrorists, not about the large masses who are not
then
terrorists.
Use the word terrorist.
About WASP.
Then use the word terrorist.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, but if I were talking about Muslims, the whole Muslim mindset has to change because it is supremacist, and apparently the Christian Zionists and the Jewish supremacy has to be tamed.
Well, unfortunately, every group has a tendency to feel that they have a tendency toward supremacy. It's written into their religions. And you're right. It's a tremendous cause of strife. I keep thinking back to Rodney King. Can't we all just get along? And apparently, according to the priests and the rulers and the kings, no, we can't. Because I want you to go on over there and smite those people and grab their wealth and bring it back to me.
Well, I agree. That's about all I had, Michael. I appreciate the opportunity to come on.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. There we are. Now, apparently, the USS Carl Vinson and its support ships is passing through the South China Sea. And the media in China, of course, is saying this is an insult, this is more saber-rattling. U.S. warships have sailed into disputed waters in defiance of China and continuing tensions. Now, the U.S. is actually out there saying that this is perfectly normal, that the U.S. Carl Vinson is out there on a cruise for disaster preparedness. That's the official story. Okay, why does the USS Carl Vinson have to be over on the other side of the planet in those disputed waters if it's really just a disaster preparedness exercise? They could do that right off the coast here of Oahu. Now, in Press TV, they're reporting on this recent report that is claiming that the U.S. Army continues to make lethal viruses, bacteria, and toxins in blatant violation of the UN Convention on the Prohibition of Biological Weapons for the purpose of biological warfare. Now, the U.S. likes to claim that they need to develop these new weapons so they can develop some kind of a defense against them. And that's how they tried to weasel word around compliance with the UN Convention. But according to this report published by Bulgarian investigative journalist Dilyana Gaitainzieva, biowarfare scientists under diplomatic cover are purportedly testing man-made viruses, viruses made at the Pentagon biolabs in at least 25 countries around the globe. Now, this brings me back to something I have mentioned before, and that is the weird behavior of Ebola in Africa, where every few years it'll pop up, then it fades away. Then it'll pop up in another area and fade away. And there doesn't seem to be any means of transmission between these areas. It's going against the wind. There's no common animal. Nobody's ever found a natural host animal for Ebola. Or what's that other one that just hit Africa? It's another hemorrhagic illness. Now, the U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff General David Goldfein is predicting it will only be a matter of years before American forces find themselves fighting from space. And to prepare for this grim possibility, he said the Air Force needs new tools and a new approach to training leaders. Oh, and of course, lots and lots of money. Got to have lots and lots of money. We're going to go take the war up into outer space here. Well, obviously with that mini robotic shuttle, they're already thinking along those ways. But again, I would like to remind everybody that there is a long-term consequence of war in low Earth orbit. Of course, we know the military doesn't care about long-term consequences. That's what that Atomic Homefront documentary was all about. And by the way, I got a lot of email. People are checking it out. That's a good thing. We have dumped munitions, including chemical weapons, off the coast of Oahu here. They're marked on the little charts. Don't bottom net here. When you are fighting in the air, near the ground, and you shoot down a missile or an airplane or a drone, the pieces all fall to Earth, and that's the end of it. If you are in orbit and you're shooting at each other, and one of you explodes, that debris and shrapnel, some of it will go back down to the Earth and burn up in the atmosphere, but a lot of it, most of it, is just going to go into different orbits, and they'll present a threat to commercial satellites that are up there, maybe even other military forces up there. You could start a cascade chain reaction that would turn low Earth orbit into an orbiting shooting gallery with just these untrackably small pieces of debris crossing your orbital path at thousands of miles an hour. We could literally imprison ourselves inside that shell of debris if we allow this to move forward. Okay, let's take a phone call. James in South Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I got two things, Michael. First, I want you to reach out and convert some erstwhile liberals. There's a guy named H.A. Goodman, has his own little YouTube thing. And another lady named Debbie, I don't know her last name, but she has a thing called the Sane Progressive. Both of these people were just jumping up and down for Bernie Sanders. But they have both become disenchanted with Bernie Sanders and with the Democrats.
Yes.
I think if you would have either one of them on your show and talk to them, and I think you could win them over. I think it'd be a good thing to do.
Well, I'll look into it and I'll give it a try. And we're trying to get some more guests on here. I'm still trying to get one of the filmmakers from Atomic Homefront on here as well.
Well, that'd be interesting. I got one other thing. This is something I've wondered about for a long time. With everybody trying to shut down the different YouTubes and all like this, it would seem to me it would be a wonderful thing to put up some electronic billboards somewhere. I know it's expensive, but everybody jumps up and down about CNN and the other places not broadcasting things. If you put an electronic billboard across the street from CNN or CBS or whoever it is, New York Times, and you ask questions, why aren't you publishing this? Why aren't you saying that? And you could use it just like a news blog. And if you hardwired it, I don't see how anybody could alter it or anything like that. Would that be a good idea?
Billboards are a good way to reach people. I know that architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth use billboards an awful lot. They had one in downtown New York, in fact, leading up to the 10th anniversary of 9/11. Basically, even today, people should be calling the corporate media and saying, why aren't you covering the Uranium One story? Why aren't you covering the Clinton Foundation's behavior in Haiti? And the media knows what they're not covering. They know what they've been told not to cover. But I think the more they come to understand that their viewers know what is not being covered and why, it's probably going to put more pressure on them. But in the end, all of this corporate media is clearly now totally under government control. It always has been to an extent, Operation Mockingbird. But we're seeing this iron-fisted control on the flow of information in the corporate media. Now they're trying to bring it here to the independent media, and we just have to resist as hard as we can.
Well, it just seems like to me there would be a public shaming. I mean, everybody can see a billboard, and it's very public, and there would be a shaming factor that. But that's all I had. I'll continue to listen, Michael. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And getting on back to the gun debate. Remember, Senator Yee was pro-gun control, and he got arrested for gun trafficking, and now he's on his way to jail. Do as I say, don't do as I do. Saw a photograph of Ellen DeGeneres at an anti-gun rally surrounded by 6 armed bodyguards. Now, over in Myanmar, they've bulldozed the remains of Rohingya Muslim villages, supposedly to make way for refugee settlement. They're being accused of actually trying to destroy the evidence of the atrocities that have been taking place over there. And Human Rights Watch said it analyzed satellite imagery showing Myanmar had flattened at least 55 villages in Rakhine. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to the show. And if you would like to help Republic Broadcasting, and folks, we really need it right now. We're in a war. The corporate media is coming after us. And it all comes down to money. If you can help us, if you can send a check or a money order, the address is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302. Round Rock, Texas, 78664. Or if you want to call on in and pledge to be a recurring subscriber, the phone number is 800-724-2719, extension 03. And of course, donations to whatreallyhappened.com are also needed, welcome, and appreciated. Let's go to the phones here. James in Ohio. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. As YouTube squeezes out the entire right from, being able to post videos, I had 2 strategies I thought of for overcoming this. There's no way anybody can recreate YouTube, and they bleed millions of dollars like a sieve on, the servers and maintenance and IT people. But 2 things we could do is to use the torrenting platform with some kind of designation in the title of videos that indicate they're part of an anti-censorship effort for, the right wing. Furthermore, there are these, of course, for-profit companies that stream copyrighted television and shows and film. That could also be done. Of course, that would, I guess, probably places like InfoWars and Breitbart would be able to set that up more easily, but it wouldn't be out of the range of possibility for even the poorer parts of the right. And as far as the free speech on the internet, of all people, I have to. I think what I liked best was a quote from John Waters on the YouTube channel Big Think. He said, "I think it should be legal to shout fire in a crowded theater."
Okay.
So, I was most comfortable. I was on a forum called libertyforum.org, and you had everybody on there from Israelis to Nazis to communists to homosexuals, Orthodox Christians, and that's where I felt most comfortable. I think that's what the internet should be. Yeah, we had flame wars and things like that, but after we got over that quickly. It's kind of like legalizing drugs. You think that everybody's going to become a heroin addict. That's not really what happens. After we got over the name calling, we actually settled down and found points of mutual benefit and agreement, and we could discuss things unemotionally. So, but anyway, I just thought that those two ideas may have some merit.
Well, again, what we're going to see happening, I mean, corporate media is clearly in trouble. Newsweek is about to get evicted from their offices. They're under investigation for fraud. There are going to be people who are going to set up new video streaming services, and we just have to find one. I'm looking at the one that Health Ranger's getting ready to set up. And we just all agree that's where we're going to go. We all have little pointers on our website saying, if you want censorship-free videos, go here. And it'll take off. YouTube is killing itself with the censorship. So is Twitter. Twitter's being sued. So is Facebook. People are shutting off their... nobody wants to go to these corporate social media sites that, one, are surveilling everything that we do, and two, are now trying to tell us what we can see, hear, and read. That's not America. Yeah. And if you want to live like that, I suggest that the CEOs of YouTube and Facebook and Twitter move their operations to like Nazi Germany or someplace like that, where censorship is considered. Venezuela or China.
Yeah. All right. That's all I had for you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. And little flashback story. This goes back to, I think it was 2013. Let me take another look at the date on this thing. Yeah, 2013. Apparently, the Washington Metropolitan Police Chief Kathy Lanier helped Senator Dianne Feinstein acquire assault weapons that are illegal to possess in the District of Columbia. So once again, we have these politicians that think gun control is for you, for the masses, and we have a right to be armed. And so we'll see what happens from that. Feinstein's on her way out. She couldn't even get her own party's endorsement for November. So does this mean she has to give back all those illegal arms that the police gave her? That would be interesting. All right. Now, Russia's Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Rogozin has said that sanctions on the Russian companies are forever. And he's saying the sanctions are the reaction of our old material enemy to our strengthening. And they'll only be lifted only if we are seen to become weak again. Therefore, us sanctions are a chance to show the best features of our national character. Now, another thing about the sanctions is all these sanctioned countries are having to learn how to become more self-reliant. This works against the globalist agenda. We'll be back after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Little economic news here. Apparently, the Wyoming House just voted overwhelmingly to remove all taxation from gold and silver. What that means is gold and silver can now be used as lawful money in Wyoming. And the Federal Reserve is not going to be happy about that at all. The Federal Reserve's plan is that we all use their currency or electronic currency, which we pay interest on. That's how they enslave countries, with that scam of a debt-based economy where the private central bank has the authority to create and issue the currency as a loan at interest. They loan it into circulation. Wyoming's trying to fight back against that. Okay, let's take a phone call here. Joe in Rhode Island. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Mike, a local radio station about, I say a week ago, published a report saying that the government officials are looking into Chinese clubs or fraternities, some kind of club, that they will be investigated for as being spies. Do you know anything about that story?
I saw it briefly, but it's like Russian hacking the DNC server. It's just part of the propaganda to demonize China ahead of a war. That's what propaganda does. It tricks us all into hating the designated enemy, not feeling any sympathy for them when the blood starts to flow. And I'm sure that Russia and China do actually have spies here, but I suspect that this story is more about building the case for war with China than any actual reporting. I'll tell you who's got the most number of spies on our college campuses is the FBI. They have informants on every college campus in America. They have, going back at least to Vietnam, because I knew one. I didn't know he was an informant until after that riot at Disneyland, at which point he tried to recruit me, which is the last time I ever spoke to him.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Also, Mike, psychotropic drugs, these modern psychotropic drugs that psychiatrists are prescribing to young people today in schools.
Yes.
Could you expound on that a little bit? What is it all about?
It's about money.
What do you think the percentages are? And when these kids miss 3 or 4 days of taking their pills, what happens to them?
Well, that's the dangerous part.
They're very, very powerful.
They are very, well, what it's all about is money. And the medical industrial complex, which is not content with selling drugs to really sick people, is out there inventing diseases. In fact, the guy who came up with the term ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, shortly before he passed away, he went public and said, we just made it up. We made up an imaginary disease in order to sell medication for it. That's where it all came from. And these medications are very dangerous. The SSRIs can cause all kinds of problems. And as it turns out, the mechanism by which SSRIs are supposed to combat depression has been discovered not to actually work. So it's all downside and no upside. But there's a huge amount of money to be made. And just like they're now doing with vaccines, we're probably going to see the government mandate that we take certain mental medications, like in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And they are very dangerous, and you need to go over to ssristories.org and read about some of these case studies. But again, it's all about money. It's all about extracting more money from the people. Sure. We had that story last week. There are over 1 million children under the age of 6 in this country who are already on prescription antidepressants.
Oh. Mike, in addition to that, did you watch C-SPAN Sunday for the National Governors Meeting on opioids? Did you happen to see that program?
I saw excerpts of it this morning.
They had about 35 governors testify. These guys don't know what to do. This thing is much bigger than people are saying. You had one doctor prescribed 6,100 prescriptions for opioid in 1 year, Mike.
It's all about the money.
Opioid is the poppy. The poppy.
It's heroin, yes.
I mean, what are we missing here? And you had to hear Mike, you got to go back and listen to that whole program. These governors were stymied. They were trying to get ideas from one another. You had to hear the scenarios and the situations that were going on. You wouldn't believe it. Everybody should listen to that program. Somehow bring it up on demand or something. I don't know how you do it, but
okay.
All right, Mike. That's all I got, Mike.
All right. Thanks a lot for the phone call, Joe. And again, it was all about the money. After conquering Afghanistan, The poppies were blooming, an inexpensive source of opium. And yes, some of the opioids are synthetics as well. But they just poured it on into this country, both as illicit drug sales and legitimate prescriptions. But a sale is a sale is a sale is a sale. And look at the harm it is causing. But it's all driven by money. And in the end, nothing will be done because those pharmaceutical corporation lobbyists won't allow anything to change because it's all about the money. Okay, now then, Bank of America has admitted that cryptocurrencies threaten its business model. Again, they want everybody having cash in the bank, even if it's cashless, which everybody's pushing to. But basically, Bank of America is saying cryptocurrencies are operating outside the banking chain and represent lost assets and lost revenue. Well, maybe you need to become more attractive to the customers than the cryptocurrencies. The cryptocurrencies came about because of the abuses of our financial system, such as that private central bank. This story just is amazing. It's about Great Britain, about London, and police in London are just at a loss to explain why rape is up 20% in Sadiq Khan's London. Well, I think if you look at Sweden, you're going to get your answer. Now, Justin Trudeau is going around saying that the most common complaint he gets from Canadians is, you're not bringing in enough immigrants. I think that scores 2.5 Pinocchios right there. The BBC is starting to push back on sovereigntists. It's declared populism is truly terrifying. Look, it got us Brexit, and it got Donald Trump. Well, Brexit and Trump were the vote and will of the people. And basically what BBC is saying is that ordinary people are really too stupid, and we shouldn't be allowing them to vote anymore. Now, the UN global charities have been stained recently by allegations that the aid workers going into these devastated areas are actually trading the aid for sex in many cases. They were caught doing it in Haiti, and apparently they've been caught doing it in Syria. And apparently the exploitation is so widespread that some women refuse to go to the aid distribution centers because they assume they will be required to offer their bodies here. Okay, let's see. Did we do Joe in California, or is this a new caller? Okay, Joe in California, let's get him online here. And aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I was calling in regards to the issue of the way the government works very hard to get everyone to split up and at odds with one another.
Yes.
As a way to keep the public down and beneath the unaccountable government. And one of the things I was wondering is, in the old days, so to speak, when the Constitution was written, how did everyone in the old days, with the limited communication abilities they had, get everyone together to stand up and write the Constitution to become we the people and no longer be?
Well, they did everything they did everything with the Postal Service. The written word was the only means of communication, and they basically just mailed letters back and forth. And the understanding was that even on a horseback rider, a letter could take a week to get from New Hampshire to, say, South Carolina.
I just think that it's amazing how hard the Founding Fathers worked to build such an amazing thing as the Constitutional Republic. And it must have been very well structured for it to stand as long as it has. And even at this stage of our existence, we are still fending them off, so to speak. These powerful deep state shadow government agencies that are working so hard to get rid of us, so to speak. And
yeah, absolutely. The Constitution was written to create strong, sovereign, independent states and a weak central government that acted as an arbiter only and was forbidden a standing army. And these were all because of lessons learned by the Founding Fathers, who had remembered what conditions were like in Britain. And so obviously, as a central government starts to rise and grab power, they don't like this idea that there's restrictions on them. And right after the Civil War, there were a whole bunch of amendments passed to the Constitution. You ought to take a look through them. And it basically consolidated power. It reduced the independence of the states, even those that had stayed with the Union. It basically said that the federal government could borrow as much money as it wanted, and the states had nothing to say about it. Just all kinds of abuse that piled on there. And today, of course, we see the government is openly contemptuous not only of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, but of anybody who still holds these documents to be the ultimate law of the land.
Yes. Two of the things I've seen on YouTube, one of them is a video that takes a small excerpt from the Bugs Life movie, and it's titled, "Then They All Might Stand Up to Us."
Yes.
And it was posted by the country of Portugal. And it explains how the strength of all of us comes from the strength of us each as individuals.
That sequence in the movie, that was my favorite sequence in that movie.
And then the other movie I've seen on YouTube is called The Tiny Dot.
Yes.
Where it also explains that the goal of a corrupt government is to break everyone down into individuals and usher them off into little cubicles to smash them down and keep them silent and detain them, versus the whole nation coming together as we the people, as it states in the top of the Constitution. And I don't know how else to put it other than every time you turn around, the infringement of everybody's rights so that one or two corporations can continue to profit.
Yep.
It seems so like the focus of this nation has gone off the rails.
Well, we've stopped being a republic and we've descended into a fascist economic dictatorship. And that's really where we are right now.
Okay. Well, thank you for taking my call. Great show.
All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. And we're going to scroll you up here. Too many buttons here. Now, apparently a couple of weeks ago, Portland State University held a discussion on diversity that was moderated by one of their philosophy professors, Peter Boghossian. And the panel included former Google engineer James Damore, who was fired from Google after a memo about diversity at Google, and a lot of far-left people out there. And the trouble didn't begin until Boghossian asked Pluckrose, who was a biologist, about men and women. And Helen Pluckrose basically said, it's the idea that all of our traits and our characteristics and abilities, cognitive, psychological, behavioral, are learned from societal norms. The idea that there can be innate or biological or inherited differences are dismissed. And so we're in a position where if there is injustice or if there is an imbalance anywhere, sort of an inequality of representation, then the explanation for that can be societal injustice. Now, this basically went against the grain, because basically this biologist is saying men and women are different. We're born different. And Helen's comment there goes all the way back to Margaret Mead's coming of age in Samoa, which is the foundation of the liberal political philosophy. This idea that we are born with completely blank minds that are all identical, and that everything that we learn, everything that we feel, comes in from the outside, from our life experience. And that's why the liberals believe that they can tinker with the environment and that will re-engineer the human mind, and we'll all be happy little mushrooms sitting around and voting Democrat for the rest of our lives. It doesn't really work that way. Our mental makeup is a blend. Yes, our life experiences do have an impact, but we are born with certain inherent qualities. I was born a guy. I was thankfully born with a high IQ. That doesn't come from the environment. And liberals hate that. They hate that idea. They want everything, almost like the Soviet Union. Everything is required to be identical so that nobody has to feel inferior. Nobody has to take responsibility for their own shortcomings. Okay, now, a taxpayer-funded university, San Diego State, is now offering a course dedicated exclusively to the topic of removing President Trump from office. The class is titled Trump Impeachment, Removal, or Conviction. It is one of 4 one-credit courses being offered for students who need to complete their graduation requirements before commencement in May. Now, the course description is going to be, focus will be on the 2 constitutional grounds, impeachment and removal, 25th Amendment, and the possible charges of the independent counsel, the powers of the president, a history of the creation of the office, blah, 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 blah. What they're basically doing, they're propagandizing the kids. That's not what they got those student loans and went to college for. All right, we're going to take a commercial break. We're going to be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today. Breaking story. This is from CNBC. Apparently, Special Counsel Robert Mueller is moving to dismiss more than 20 criminal counts against former Trump campaign official Rick Gates. Now, Gates pleaded guilty Friday to conspiracy against the U.S. and lying to federal investigators. But Mueller is now dropping all of these charges. And the expectation is that he is counting on Rick Gates to turn on Donald Trump and fabricate the much-needed evidence of Trump-Russia collusion. And so this is just getting dirtier and dirtier. Meanwhile, lawyers representing victims of the October shooting near the Mandalay Bay have filed a lawsuit against the concert promoter, Live Nation Entertainment, saying that the concert goers are due a refund. They weren't able to see the entire concert, and that's 22,000 tickets right there. They filed the suit in Orange County. The suit alleges, among other things, that Live Nation offered its condolences to concert goers but neglected to return all ticket costs to those who purchased tickets. Now, here's another little story about, blame Russia, blame Russia, blame Russia. Apparently, there were some technical glitches during the presentation of the Winter Olympics, and now the U.S. intelligence community is absolutely convinced Russia hacked the Winter Olympics. Now, South Korea is saying it was just technical difficulties, which can happen. When you have a large event, you've just brought in the cameras and monitors and everything, things don't always go right. But by golly, the U.S. is absolutely convinced that Russia hacked the Winter Olympics. Why would they bother? The story just doesn't make any sense at all. Now, here's an interesting story. This was actually reported on corporate mainstream media, and they're talking about this year's flu season, which has been really, really bad. And they quoted this nurse, this expert, Anna Trieg, saying that the flu epidemic is potentially caused by the flu shot because of the way they manufacture it and the mutations of the virus. So you're not getting a vaccine for the flu that's out there. You're being injected with an entirely different flu virus. And they actually allowed this on TV. And that's rather risky because according to this story out of Atlanta Black Star, there was a CDC doctor who was saying exactly the same thing. The flu shot caused the outbreak, disappeared. First of this month has not been found. Oh, it gets ugly out there. All right, we're coming up here to the end of the program, and I'm going to have to leave as soon as the music starts because I've got another interview that I need to go to. So stay tuned for John Stedmiller's program. I'm sure he has all kinds of interesting things to share with you. Please keep up the pressure. Keep taking these stories, sharing them with everybody that you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.